Welcome, everyone. It's a really great pleasure to be able to have this conversation with Dr. Samuel Torjman Thomas, who's the director and founder of the ASEFA ensemble. Samuel and I, we've known each other for now, I think it's well over 20 years. And so it's a real pleasure to be able to have this discussion here over Zoom. So what I'd like to do, you've all had a chance to hear this fantastic presentation, a fantastic concert. Samuel, I'd like to ask if you would discuss a bit about the origins of the ASEFA ensemble. How did you come to focus on the music that you're focusing on? And if you could tell me a bit more also about how the ensemble has developed over the years, both in terms of the projects that you've taken on, as well as your repertoire.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, as Judah mentioned, we have known each other for quite some time, so it's an extra sweet conversation to have. ASEFA, well, it really started in 2001. After I moved to New York, frankly, I moved to New York 5 weeks before 9/11. And, that obviously was a big shock to the system in New York. It wasn't something, totally unfamiliar to those with the background in Middle Eastern societies and experiences, but nevertheless, it was pretty shocking. And I felt that, I wanted to have a way to assert a voice in the conversation that was rooted in Jewish musical traditions, and one that was positive, and rather than what was going to be a deluge of anxieties and exacerbated conflicts between groups. I wanted to try and assert something that was really about how the Jewish experience in world history is one that really gathers different cultures together, right? So that's kind of the diasporic Jewish story. So ASEFA literally means a gathering, a collective, and the intention from the get-go, and still remains, is that there are different gatherings, if you will, that I lead, musical gatherings that emphasize different aspects of this Jewish diasporic world. So as somebody who had moved to New York as a jazz saxophonist, but had also a lot of experience in klezmer as a clarinetist, and who also had experience in North African musical traditions from my youth and from playing the ney and the bindir, I felt like somewhat uniquely positioned to try and touch on some of these different things. And so iterations of the ensemble kind of started that way. Our first album really traversed quite a wide range of styles within one album. And over time, the ensemble morphed, I would say, to gather more experiences that I personally was having with my own development in scholarship of Jewish musical traditions and Jewish studies and ethnomusicology, and how that would color the work that I would begin to pursue. So I added the oud to my repertoire of instruments, and that allowed me, of course, to sing, which was something I couldn't do with the clarinet or saxophone in my mouth, and to then dig into the Hebraic and Arabic and Ladino repertoire that I also was intimately familiar with for years. Also did open up ASEFA a little bit too beyond the North African frame, which led me with the language of the oud and so forth to really delve deeper into Eastern makam traditions. And that also coincided a lot with my own personal experience in the field, if you will, as an ethnomusicologist, living in a part of Brooklyn that is most populated by the Syrian community, but the Egyptian and Turkish elements are quite strong here, and as well, newer iterations of Israeli, Sephardi, Mizrahi, immigrants. So I think in its roots, ASEFA is, very much still committed to the idea of a collective, a gathering. I've always emphasized the notion too that very much includes the audience. And I think the audiences that I perform for are extremely diverse in their both in their backgrounds as individuals, but certainly in their musical tastes and connections to the music I make. And therefore, you might find ASEFA doing a klezmerika performance one day, and the next day going deep into Mizrahi traditions, and the next day going more widespread Mediterranean, which is kind of what we've done for this concert, where we dig more into North African and Eastern traditions. So I think that that's kind of how the ensemble started, what its intentions were and remain, and how it's developed over the years.
Thank you. And for both providing the kind of bigger picture of how this ensemble looks at both history and sound, as well as the sense of being together, which I think is really evident also in your performance for this project. And so let's talk about this project a little bit more. Can you tell me a little bit about how you construct this idea of the Judeo-Islamic soundscape? Including the way that you select and present your repertoire, how you prepare your material and how you work with your ensemble, and how you would characterize this relationship between the sound and the traditions and the heritage that are connected to that sound.
Yeah, so I very much think like musically, we have an opportunity to express something that I think is often overlooked in modern discourses about heritage, which is just that this is indeed, the soundscape is indeed a shared soundscape. It is, an aspect of the heritage of all of the people from the region. I think about the great Maimonides, and he's never a step away from emphasizing his familiarity with and closeness to thinkers of all different backgrounds when he's talking about philosophy. So, the Jewish community doesn't operate in a bubble in that history. And I think that it's important to reiterate that. And as I said earlier, to assert that, I don't think there's no such thing as Arab culture without Arab Jewish contribution and participation in the development of what we think of as Adab al-Arabiya, which is Arabic civilization or culture, what have you. And I think that goes the same for Europe and anywhere the Jew has lived in any sort of large, strong community. So that's an animating factor, and for me, the soundscape is that. So to return to Maimonides for a second, there was one time when I was doing some field work in Morocco, and it was a time of the year where there was chanting of Quran at like 3 a.m. And I happened to be staying in a riad in the north of Morocco, and woken up by this chanting of Quran at a soft level. But it happened to be that the way that the town was structured, I was my particular room was uphill from the mosque, so the speaker was basically straight onto my bedroom window. But of course, I was happy to have that opportunity, and pulled out a recorder and recorded the experience, and just had that moment reinforcing for me the idea that this is the soundscape of Jewish history in this place. This soundscape is it's the air, it's the soil and for a musician, it is this soundscape that is part of the heritage. So, Maimonides, I just imagined for a moment, having lived, formative years of his life in Fez, which was not far from where I was at the time, was probably experiencing a very similar soundscape, you know? And so that's always been an important part of thinking about how I approach this music and why I approach it, really. And then I think in terms of the Judeo-Islamic part, you know, there's such important places of meeting in terms of philosophy and theology and expressions in poetry and literature and music, that, you know, it's more than certainly more than an Arab Jewish type of thing or Arab Christian or whatever. It's because you know, in many parts of the Muslim world, we're not really dealing with Arab Muslims ethnically, so it's not so much that. So it's Judeo-Islamic because it's so much deeper than that in terms of theological and philosophical connections. So the way that I approach the music is really, I do look for opportunities where I can, you know, showcase that integration. So that means that some texts we perform literally go back and forth between Hebrew and Arabic, which is the case on at least one song in this performance, Lama Bada and Lama Hakaitz. Or I look for things that, you know, do weave together within the same musical context, like in Ana Mali Fiash and Sha'ar Petah Dodi and Adon Olam. And so, you know, those or stories that are presented or ideas that are presented that I can bring forth those meeting points in theology and philosophy and what have you by, you know, talking about the character of the text itself. You know, if there's certain kind of philosophical ideas that would be part of the current in Islamic or Jewish or Christian thought, particularly in Andalus, which is, you know, a major touchstone for me because of that high level of integration going on there.
Thank you. And you know, it just really helps to bring some real great depth to the sound and to the music that you're presenting in your project. I also want to ask if you could touch a little bit more on another angle to this, and that is the Sephardi Mizrahi identity angle. And to sort of talk a little bit more about how you're addressing the Sephardi Mizrahi angle in both as a kind of a heritage, but also in the contemporary context of how Jewish identity is presented in the project. If you could talk about a kind of a recognition of a relatively fluid nature of Sephardi Mizrahi identity today, and especially as you're presenting it in light of recent generational shifts in Jewish life, as you've seen from a geographical, political, and religious perspective.
Yeah, so certainly I think, you know, humans are comfortable or looking for comfort in labels. And so, you know, the Sephardi label, you know, has been popular in modern discourse to kind of associate with all Jews of the Islamic world, and in contradistinction to this Ashkenazi label of Jews of the European world, or at least of Christendom. And, you know, that gets nuanced by adding this hyphen in more recent discourse, and at least characterizing Mizrahi as like, well, you know, there's Eastern elements in the Jewish community of this Islamic world that might have some distinction from the Sephardi or Spanish Iberian element. And then, of course, Jews are on the move. So, you know, such a great shift in the 20th century, and, you know, in no small part to the advent of the state of Israel. And then that, you know, just really kind of turns a lot of things on its side, or at least forces us to re-engage with, you know, these layers of Jewish history, you know. So for me, I mean, my scholarship here, I think, influences my thinking. You know, having worked on the idea of diasporic layers of identity, and the Sephardic layer being a very important one, and maybe the Moroccan layer being another one. And so Sephardi Mizrahi allows for I guess, just that labeling allows for more of a understanding of the fluidity of this part of the Jewish world and what it means in terms of Jewish identity. So I think it's important musically to assert that, which is why, even when there may be a text that I'm presenting it like Shachar V'Keshcha in the Iraqi setting, it is a Sephardi poet, one of the great poets of Spain, Ibn Gabirol, who is asserting once again this kind of Neoplatonist foundation that is current in that entire world. So, I guess I would love to add about 10 more hyphens to the moniker, if only to encourage us to get beyond labels and in and of themselves, but they do have a function. They do give us a frame of reference,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting that you're describing it within this context, and in part because in watching this concert, one of the things that I'm seeing is the setting that your concert takes place in. And I'd like to know if you could talk a little bit more about that. Where are you presenting this material? And can you sort of relate it to what you've just been talking about in terms of Sephardi Mizrahi identity?
Yeah, so thanks to the generous offer of the synagogue that I attend most regularly, Netivot Israel, which is here in Brooklyn. It's a Moroccan synagogue, which has a very interesting backstory that's very fitting to this entire construct, if you will. And that is that the synagogue was founded in the late 80s by families that immigrated directly from Morocco, which of course the Jewish community in Morocco persists to this day. And it's, one of the few vibrant Jewish communities that still persists in an Islamic country. So that's important. But the community founders wanted to build this synagogue according to the Moroccan ritual. And the king of Morocco, King Hassan II, the prior king, sent artisans on his behalf to come and help construct the inside of the synagogue according to Moroccan material arts. So they literally, a team of artisans carved the walls at the king's expense. And to this day, the representative of the king here in New York comes to the synagogue for a blessing for the country on Yom Kippur. And so it's a special moment where they enter on Yom Kippur, and everybody's present, and the rabbi does a special blessing in Hebrew and in Arabic for the king, for the kingdom of Morocco. So the setting, itself literally brings to life some of the ideas that we're talking about. And I think that now a Moroccan synagogue in Brooklyn is in the midst of this Sephardi Mizrahi mix, because there's so many other ethnic Jewish communities from that region that occupy the same space in this part of New York, and rub elbows with people, and there are marriages between people from these different communities now in this generation. And we have immigrants from France and from Israel who have now much more experiences with Mizrahi elements, if you will, not just North African. And so I think that getting back to the soundscapes too for a moment, you hear basically a crosswinds in this location, crosswinds of languages, but even of approaches to liturgy, of songs, of melodies. And so I think it's really reflective of that. And so I thought it was an evocative space for this performance to take place in.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree. It was wonderful to be able to just not just to hear the sound, but also to see the environment in which you presented it. So I know that we have to keep things relatively brief, and as we're coming, as much as I'd love to keep talking, but I have one final question to ask here, and part of it has to do with the context of the festival here, the Bloomington Early Music Festival. I've seen you present in a number of different settings, and so I'd like to ask a little bit about the idea of what it means to present within the context of an early music kind of a space. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of issues of musical historicism and how it relates to what might be seen as the expectations of a festival that tends to start as its point of reference with European musical narratives?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that the festival certainly set for themselves a charge this year of this Arabia, Iberia, and Latin America early music crossroads. So, looking to recognize the crosswinds and crossroads as opposed to keeping it within the European frame as is more typical. And I think that Spain is the obvious place to consider, where the borders of Europe extend or have been extended from several centuries ago. And so when we look at so much of what early music festivals do present as European musics, well, there's some connection to where those musics came from before, and certainly we see those connections in Spain, from instruments like the oud to the troubadours and their journeys northward, to all sorts of thinking about modal composition and stuff. So I think it's, I guess, about time in some respects that the frame should be opened up. So I commend the early music festival, Bloomington's Early Music Festival, for opening that frame wider. In terms of my interjection into that, I guess I don't see ASEFA necessarily as a repertory ensemble. That a lot of early music festivals do want to recreate a particular music of a particular time in a particular way. And I guess part of I think of the Jewish experience here is that it just is on the move. And so even if I am touching on repertoire that is within the period, it's being performed now, and it's being and the improvisation is now, and the urgency and the expressions that come out in the voice are now. So it's I'm not looking to take us back in time. I'm looking to bring history to the present.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation with you, and I'll look forward to further ones with you. But these past minutes have really been a wonderful opportunity to go more deeply into the concert, the material, and your background, and I'm grateful for that. So again, thank you one more time to Dr. Samuel Torjman Thomas and the ASEFA Ensemble for your work and for your part in the Bloomington Early Music Festival.
Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Judah Cohen. Good to talk to you about all this stuff and to share with the Bloomington Early Music Festival and all of their organizers. Thanks for having us and including our participation.